I don't know.
Right.
We talked about a lot with this group.
You on? We on live now.
Okay.
Everybody, this is Stan Huff.
Hello,
Woo!
everybody.
Hello, everybody. Stan is going to share his knowledge on what do you do when you get a low appraisal.
And sometimes I don't even know. And I
Sometimes.
do know a couple things. Liz, do you mind reading that out loud? I can't see it well enough.
Yeah. This contract is contingent upon the property being valued according to the lender's appraisal or other appraisal as agreed upon by the parties, which is the appraised value, for the purchase price or higher. If the parties are made aware that the appraised value is less than the purchase price, and the seller delivers notice to the buyer within 5 business days, or closing, whichever is earliest, it's hard to read, of an amendment to reduce the purchase price to the appraised value, the parties agree to proceed to closing under terms of this contract, with the purchase price amended to be the appraised value. Otherwise, buyer may proceed to closing or terminate this contract by delivering notice of termination to the seller, whereupon the earnest money will be refunded to the buyer, returned to the buyer. This is from your contract.
That's from the contract. And a lot of people don't stop and read that. But, you know, it's also about what the contract doesn't say, and what it doesn't say is what can you do in between that. And you can agree to split the difference, you can agree to do a lot of different things, but probably the first step in the process, and everybody thinks the lender, Dan, you can help me with this, the lender says, well, they can't talk to the appraiser says he can't talk to the agent. Well, that's not necessarily true in my opinion. They can talk, the agent can talk to the appraiser. You can offer them comps that they may not have found, and I have done that before because I went in the tax record and found a comp that he hadn't found, and it made a $40,000 difference on this particular, and it still didn't appraise. It was about $70,000. I had the listing of the historic home in Somerville. I kept telling my people it's probably not going to appraise. Guess what? It didn't appraise, but I did meet the appraiser, and this probably made the difference in him talking to me and not talking to me. So I met him. I gave him a survey of the property. I gave him the comps that I found excluding that one. Talked to him a few minutes, told him about the upgrades, because if you'll notice one thing in the appraisal, it says the effective age of a home, and that's important when you got a house that's more than 10 years old. If they've had upgrades, they can give it some weight for the effective age if they've upgraded it. So the effective age, even though the house was 150 years old, was much newer because it had a newer kitchen. So giving him that background helped him. It also helped that he was able to call me after and say, look, here's where I'm at with it. Do you see anything different? The key words are you can't influence them, right? Correct?
That's correct.
And there used to be, I don't know of anybody in South Carolina that did it, there used to be a problem with it, where the lender wanted to do the loan, the real estate agent wanted to sell it, so it wasn't collusion exactly. They kind of got together and said, hey, appraiser, can't you make this work? And so they figured out a way to make it work. And what's the act that was called, Dan?
Oh, I forget which falls on it.
It separated the appraisal, and it happened about, what, how many years ago?
There have been so many that passed out, so I don't know the name.
So anyway, and a lot of lenders don't or can't talk to the appraisal because it's an in-house guideline. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, every company has an appraisal management system of some sort, so it's an HBCC compliant piece that you have to meet, which says that a salesperson cannot directly order the appraisal because we can't choose the appraiser, so a management process has to do that. And every company handles that management process differently. If you want, when you want, I can tell you how that works.
Yeah, some of them have third parties, so they really want to protect themselves from having the influence and talking to them. But what do you do when it doesn't appraise? And obviously that depends on which side of the deal you're on, right? Mm-hmm. If you've got the buyer, you might say, great, it didn't appraise. And then you're just going to go to the listing agent and say, it didn't appraise.
But then the listing agent says, I'm not selling it, seller's not selling it.
say, well, let's see, maybe they will. How about I get you a copy of it? And, you know, it doesn't, even the listing agent can contact them, the buyer's agent can contact them. You know, if you were a buyer's agent though, and it didn't appraise, why in the world would you be fighting trying to make it appraise? You know, you kind of leave it alone. And she and I had one going on. In this case, I did. I offered him some comps and my opinion before it ever got to the appraisal because he asked me for it. And, you know, the fact is we had one that didn't appraise. The comps, or the recent comps, but they probably went under contract December, January, February. Well, they closed in the last one in March, I think, or April, right? So they closed. There was a delay there. Well, guess what? The market has risen between 8 and 15%, but they cannot give it any credit for that. Well, actually, they can. This appraiser wouldn't. So it really ties the lender's hands because once that appraiser's out there, you got to live with it. Correct? It's the appraisal.
It can be challenged.
It can be challenged. We sort of challenged this one, and it was unsuccessful. And, you know, the buyer and seller both kind of all have to go along with it, and the lender goes along with that challenge. In this case, we didn't win.
Do you think that this particular one was a VA financing, right? The
Yes.
VA appraisal?
Yeah.
Do you think the VA appraisal had anything to do with it?
It may have had some influence. Had it been a conventional appraisal, it may have come out a little different. But, you know, looking at the appraisal, it is very difficult to argue the number. And he gave certain values that I probably disagree with. He gave $8,000 for one having a garage as a credit, because this one had a garage. Well, I don't think that was enough. But that's just my opinion.
Single car or?
Single car. And he gave, and the interest in the garage, this was interesting to me, and I pointed it out to my buyer, and I think and they ended up paying a little bit more for the house. And I paid a little bit, somebody else paid a little bit, so we kind of just all got together.
And the seller took less.
And the seller took less. But the appraisal was all considerably more than I thought it should have been. You had some pretty smart people, I think, around the deal. Not that I'm the smartest guy in the world, but I've done a few of these, and I've told Liz I've been really representing buyers. I've been doing this 15 years, and that's the first time, I won't say it's ever happened, not ever happened, but that's the first time I can remember negotiating a deal that didn't appraise. I've had some listings that didn't, that I knew they were close. You know, I knew we were on the ball. I'm not going to say the name, but we got another one now. We were worried about it. I appraised in Tanner Plantation. It's a VA appraisal, and it flew right through.
As a listing agent or a seller?
As a listing agent. But as a buyer's agent, I've really only had that happen once or twice, and I can only remember one time when I had the buyer that didn't appraise. I feel pretty good about my numbers when I look at them. You know, I of course looked at it and put some appreciation in there, as I think anybody in the room should or would do, because I felt like I was giving my person sound advice. It just didn't work though. So we just kind of went back and forth with it and reached an agreement. And that's what you can do. I mean, the contract doesn't say that. It doesn't have that or. So that's really kind of what it means, in my opinion. Liz, don't you agree? If it says the buyer can proceed to closing, well, that gives him the right under different terms, right? You can negotiate, or the seller can negotiate with the buyer. You know, Susan Clavon actually helped price the house. I know she knows what she's doing. She's been around longer than I have, probably 30 years, Liz?
Well, she's been with AgentOwned 22.
Yeah, so she's been around a long time, been around the business a long time. But, you know, the fact is, we got to deal with figures in front of us. But what I was going to say, just because the appraiser says it, I mean, it is true, and from a lending standpoint, it's kind of gospel. So you gotta do it and live with those figures and work off of that. Susan had another case where she actually owned the house. The market was moving up. And it was $30,000 off in the appraisal, but the people came up with the cash difference. And it does happen, they can elect to do it. And here's an example. If you've got this type neighborhood that we're in now, all the houses were built within probably a 2 or 3 year period. One house elected to, and this is not the case, I'm just throwing that out. One guy elected to build a $20,000 outdoor kitchen.
Of what?
$20,000 outdoor kitchen in the backyard. And then he upgraded his whole kitchen. He spent $50,000. Well, an appraiser isn't going to make that house worth $50,000 more, but in a sense, the buyer might see that as value and pay them extra for it, and that might be an out-of-pocket expense because that may be the sole reason they're buying the house. So anyway, I'll just kind of really open it up for questions. Anybody got a scenario that they've dealt with or trying to deal with, Jill?
Mine's not a scenario, I'm just being direct, technically speaking, paperwork trail. So let's say Teresa wasn't someone you knew in our office. So you call them first, or first do we do an addendum saying it didn't? What is the first step that you take?
I think the first step is a phone call.
Okay.
The other step to that in the process is nobody owns that appraisal but the buyer and the bank. So you really have to ask the buyer, can I send that appraisal to the seller? Which is only prudent that you do because, guess what? They're not going to believe you unless you send them the proof. So, I mean, that's kind of the first step. But, you know, if you follow exactly what the contract says, it says send them a notice to adjust the price.
Okay.
So that would be the first step. You fire the shot, send it out there. You know,
So that's an addendum 1, what we're sending?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just the appraisal came in at such and such value, you know, buyer will proceed. If we adjust the prices, we just send it to them.
Okay.
See what happens. Yes, sir.
Since if you have a mortgage, there's going to be an appraisal involved, but what if you're a cash buyer?
It doesn't really matter.
Doesn't really matter?
It doesn't. I mean, if you wanted to use that and it's contingent on appraisal, you could certainly still go back to them and say, you can only appraise for that. That's all I'm going to pay. It doesn't matter whether you're paying cash or finance it. You know, you may not have the difference. And here's another one. We put closing costs in the contract all the time, right? It happens. If it doesn't appraise, does that come out or not? What do you think? If it's in the contract and you're getting closing costs and it does not appraise, does that come out of the contract?
Not automatically.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
I have to answer for them because they're timid.
Yeah, I'm trying to draw them out a little bit, but it doesn't automatically come out of there. So what do you do in that case? You have to negotiate that part of it too, because, you know, it depends on what the people owe. You know, if they don't have a mortgage on their property and they want to sell it, they may be perfectly willing to adjust the price and leave that closing cost in there.
Your lender may be able to compensate and do a lender credit for closing costs.
Exactly, make up the difference for them. The case I had in the historic house in Somerville, we had to adjust the price and leave the closing cost in there because they just couldn't buy the house.
Why are those two related, appraisal and closing costs as contained in the contract? Aren't they two separate?
Well, they have to be because it affects the seller's net.
Right.
So if it doesn't appraise, the seller's going to have to adjust the price, which could affect his net.
Well, you can renegotiate the whole contract in its entirety.
That's his point.
Yeah.
It pretty much, certain points, not the
Yeah,
entire.
I just want to make sure I understood that.
But the appraisal and the closing costs certainly. And other fees. I mean, you know, you might take out a warranty, for instance, or you might take out, you know, the buyer may have to pay for his own termite litter. It could be anything like that. in a sense, you're right. I wouldn't try to negotiate the whole contract on either side of it. Leave as much of it intact as you can and talk about price and what makes everybody happy and gets them there. Because once it doesn't appraise, it doesn't do any good to figure out the number and add the appraisal, the closing costs back to it. Because it's just money out of the buyer's pocket either way. So you kind of gotta go with the appraised price on that.
Stan, tell them about you and Teresa, what you did on the, because y'all ended up giving up a little bit of your commission to make it work.
We did.
But tell them how you did that.
The original loan, they're getting a VA loan, 100% financing, and then the seller was paying all their closing costs. So, and the people do have some money to put down. They don't have a ton, and they want to do stuff to the house. So, in this case, they went back to the lender. The seller said, we'll adjust the price. There was about $5,000 difference between the appraised price and what the seller said it'd take for it. So there's $5,000 difference. The buyer went back to the lender and said, hey, what do you think? They said, I still think it's a great house. You're not going to find another house for this price in Mount Pleasant. They said, yeah, it's kind of what we're thinking, but we don't know. It's cash out of pocket. So the lender worked the numbers, and Dan can speak to how this works. Gave them back some yield spread to pay their closing costs, and they ended up rolling that into the deal. And they were, instead of the $5,000 plus their closing costs, which would have been about $9,000, they were able to whittle that down to just the $5,000. So they were able to take care of everything through a lender credit. So they said, well, gosh, we still don't want to do it. I said, look, I'll get the agent to try to work with you on the other side. I'll kick in something. If you can make it work, if you can come up with $3,000 when you close, and they said yes. So that's kind of where we wound up, and then Teresa and I ended up splitting. So we gave $1,000 a piece.
But then how in the world do you work that into the contract?
Well, in this case, we went back to the lender and said, how do you want it? Because there's a lot of different ways we could have worked it. If the lender would allow it, we could have left the price where the seller needed it to be to net them what they wanted, and the total commission to give them their net. Went to the lender and asked them how they wanted it, because we could have given a rebate on the HUD to the buyer of the $2,000, so they only been $3,000 out of pocket. In this case, the lender said, we'll just go ahead and reduce the price by $2,000. We're doing a closing cost anyway, so it's still only $3,000 out of pocket. And there's probably another way we could have done it, but that's the fastest way to do it. It reduced the buyer's cost, kept the net to the seller the same.
You can run into some sellers that say, no, I want my house not to be on the records for less than.
Yeah.
So if you had that case, if these sellers had said that, how would you work that out?
Well, that's a good question. I think
You want a lower tax rate.
Thank God they didn't say.
You want a lower tax rate.
Well,
No, what I'm trying to reducing the commission and paying closing costs and all that.
well, in that case, you could have left it the same and given the seller a commission rebate. And that would have still worked, and it would still show $290 instead of $288. So, I mean, it would have been the same to work it out that way. And, at the end of the day, the MLS requires that you put the sales price and the concessions in the notes. So it really wouldn't matter, but you do have some people that want it to show higher. Honestly, for selfish reasons, I think it's better for the buyer to show a higher price, because it sets the tone for the next appraisal. And there's going to be another house in there right behind this one. Because of this one, it's not going to appraise. And here's a fact. Nobody can argue this. If nobody ever paid more for a house, they would never go up in value. I mean, that is a fact. If they didn't appraise it for a little more, they would never go up in value. That's just how it is. And here's one of my favorite things I'll tell you, and this is great when you're negotiating. Don't say it too often because it's mine. I apologize. If you read this appraisal clause and you're the listing agent, the buyer is fully protected by the appraisal clause. The seller is not. So in that case, if it appraised for more, that seller doesn't get the benefit of that. So that's how you can negotiate a higher price sometimes on your listing. If they start throwing, well, it's not going to appraise, it's not going to appraise. You just tell the other agent, say, look, go back to your people and tell them they're protected. And I'm the listing agent talking to the buyer's agent, buy the appraisal. If it doesn't appraise, they're not going to have to buy it. They can walk away, or we can adjust the price. We'll work it out then, but my seller is not protected by that appraisal, because if it appraises for $10,000 more, your buyer's not going to pay that, is he? Because he's got a contract. So that's just always a good negotiating tool. Nick's heard that one, I think.
It's good.
Anybody have any questions?
Go ahead. If you're going to try to present the appraiser with additional facts, I'm going to call them, additional comps or something like that, you pretty well have to get that done before he is really sent the appraisal into the bank.
No.
You can't do that. Even after they told the lender what it is, they'll go back and change it.
Yeah, the lender will allow it. You just tell the lender, look, we don't agree with it. And if both agents don't agree with it, they tell the lender they're going to listen to them, and they'll let them go back to the appraiser. That doesn't mean the appraiser's going to listen to it.
That's when Dan was talking about you can challenge the appraisal.
Yeah, each lender's going to have a different way to handle that. In essence, when we get the appraisal that comes in low, first people we call are the buyer and buyer's agent. So here's where we are, here's what happened. And in our case, we say, if you have information, take a look at it. If you feel like they've made some mistakes, you have information. If you have a property that recently sold that is not, that they didn't access for some reason, let us know. Occasionally they make a mistake. And then, in our case, processor can go straight to the appraiser and give it to them. We don't have a third-party management system. We do it ourselves and hand select our appraisers so that we have everybody local and talented here. Other companies, some of the larger banks, have a third-party system, and you have to directly send in a form with comparables or any information to them. They sit on it for 48 hours before they send it out. And then it goes through, and it's a lengthy process. And I will tell you, challenging an appraisal, you'll have limited success in overturning it. And this is an opinion, not fact, but don't even challenge a VA appraisal.
Yeah.
It's just not going to go anywhere. That is a very prideful group of folks that earn whatever they earn to do VA appraisals, and they just won't change it.
That's why I wanted to point out that this was a VA appraisal.
Yeah, VA appraisals are their own beast. You order through the VA portal. They control who gets it, and so we can't do anything on those. We can fill out the same forms and anybody else can challenge it, but it's very difficult. So mostly you're going to handle these unless you notice an egregious error or property that's missing that's a better comparable. You're mostly going to be negotiating something here. But it is an opportunity if you have to turn that over to a listing agent and say, I'm sorry, I didn't appraise for or not. Do you have anything that can help me combat this? It sort of takes a little bit of the tension away and gives them an opportunity to fight, quote unquote, for their property. Most of the time they look at it and say, these are dust comes.
Well, and it's like any other system, garbage in, garbage out. If they look at the comps, and especially if they're local to that neighborhood, they may realize that a comp is wrong. I've seen that. You just enter it, you got fat fingers, and you put it in there wrong.
If it's not a VA appraisal, everybody, I think I know everybody in the room, I'm your in-house, at Prosperity. If it's not a VA appraisal, like I just had an instance come across my desk where an agent actually went back to SunTrust. Their mortgages with SunTrust, they were going to refinance. It's a condo out at Wild Dunes. And the SunTrust appraisal came in pretty low. Some of your bigger banks, some of their platforms, if you will,
seem to have a few little glitches in them. Now, not always, but once in a while. When they came to me and explained the problem about the appraisal, ours came in, when we ordered it, it was just a conforming loan, so there wasn't a VA. I wouldn't challenge a VA, but ours came in off of our platform $117,000 higher than the platform off. Exactly the same house or condo out at Wild Dune, and within 2 weeks of itself. So when you get into some conforming areas, sometimes it may be of interest to at least talk to a different lender, just to see if we have any other take on it, or, you know, we can run it up the flagpole and see if our appraisal might come in a little higher, because sometimes we can help you on that, on those cases. And I'll be glad to at least look at it for you. And this was an agent here at AgentOwned, so we're finishing up their refinance now that, you know, they weren't able to do it through Sunburn. So,
Well,
just
you know,
an interesting work.
and the reality is when the market's rising, the appraisal lags behind. So you're more likely in a better market to get a house that doesn't appraise than if it's moving the other way, because they don't react as fast as we do. So we're more in tune to the market, and, you know, conforming appraisals, appraisers know that, and a lot of times I get phone calls all the time from appraisers that ask me about, well, when you sold this, what did it have? And the funny thing is, you know, when I talk to those guys, I can almost tell you what they want me to say. Was it in good condition? Because they want you to say no. Was it in great shape? They want you to say yes. You know, I mean, they'll give you a cue because they're trying to make something. They're trying to make something work.
They're trying to make the market tabs make sense.
That's right. And they have some leeway, but they've got somebody behind them called an underwriter. And if you've got huge adjustments, they aren't going to allow it. Or they're going to at least question it and say why, and then he's going to have to write up a rebuttal. And then the underwriter can request an appraisal review or a second appraisal. Right?
Yep.
Glad you're here.
That's true.
Glad you're here.
I get half credit for this
You
presentation.
did. I was wondering why you just didn't.
Well, no, if I stood up there, Mama Liz would have hit me.
Okay.
I was not instructed to be a presenter.
So, are you saying that she says you talk too long?
She told me this.
Well, I've heard it too. That's okay. I enjoy it. Thank you for helping. Any other questions?
Dan, what did you say that, you know, when the property finally closes, that you have to put the concession down at the bottom? So
Well, in this case, there won't be a concession.
It will not be.
It'll just be the price. Now, what I would recommend when this closes is to put in the agent notes, the contract price agreed to was X, the appraisal came in at, and the buyer and seller, because the next appraiser would love to know that.
If somebody was willing to pay that.
Because the indication of value is what? An appraiser's going to tell you what?
What someone's going to pay.
Exactly. What a seller will sell for and a buyer will buy for. That is the best indication of value. Long before I got in this business, I was at somebody's house, an appraiser was doing the appraisal for a refi. It's my cousin's house. And I just happened to be there. He said, man, I want you to appraise it for what it's, you know, what it's worth. He said, well, it's worth what somebody's willing to pay for it. He said, why do y'all always do the contract value? Because that's the best indication of value. And that's why most of the time it's going to appraise almost exactly for what the contract price is, because that's hard to argue that that's not the value. In some cases, they can't justify it. You know, my house in Somerville, I couldn't justify it. You know, I think it was probably worth $1 million. Contract price was $460,000.
What was the estimate on your deal?
You know, I didn't even look for it. Probably wasn't. It probably was not good. And well, boy, to be honest with you, they've gotten better. About 8 years ago, they were horrible. It would tell you a dump was worth $700,000 and you know, a great house was worth $250. I mean, it was just crazy. But they've gotten better, because I think they've shrunk they used to draw a big circle. That's how they came up with it. So if you had a trailer park next to a nice neighborhood, you got credit for that. Anybody else? Susan, you didn't come alive.
Yeah. I skated till the camera's off. I'll ask the later.
Come on.
You have a question, Susan?
I just wanted to ask about, like, we had an appraisal on a house with Rex,
Mhm.
and it came back that the roof was in great shape, and the roof was 28 years old, and then we had because we were trying to close quickly, and we had the home inspection done, which gave a horrible report on the roof, yet the appraiser lady was there to do the house appraisal and said the roof was in great shape, and
I've never seen an appraiser on a roof
yeah.
doing a roof job.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
what-
they're
that's
just-
what Rex
the
said.
real answer is they're not an expert. It's a visual inspection. And that's all it is.
And like
Can I-
everything else in life, looks can be deceiving.
They can. I'm going to get the important piece, though, and to bring that up on a side note regarding inspections. As a lender, we don't need to see the inspection except a VA deal, or if the appraiser makes mention of something that is of issue. We had a deal that was clear to close. The package was at the attorney's office, and the paralegal said, "Here's the inspection," and it had some wood rot and some things on there that didn't pertain to conventional, and it stopped the deal. And because the underwriter is now staring at it, and there was a health concern in there, they had to address it. So we don't need an inspection unless we ask for it. Same with the CL 100
We do
for
not
VA.
need them, don't send
We need
them.
the CL 100 for VA. We don't have to have it unless it's mentioned in an appraiser that there's some damage. So err on the cautious side and do not send it to us.
You can come and talk to me about them now, I
You
can help
can.
you with any issues that you have on there, I just don't send me a hard copy, please.
Yeah. Now, you still have your ethical
Yeah.
boundaries that you have to follow, you know, as an agent representing buyer. So,
And Susan, we fixed that little roof quickly, didn't we? We had it, all patched up, or, didn't that problem, who was that on, Shotnell?
Oh,
Never mind. I was gonna say, the one that,
Teresa had a question.
well, it's not so much a question.
Oh, a statement.
The statement, since, you know, I'm still kind of new. One thing I learned from all this, well, I learned a lot from this. But one thing I learned was that, it all goes back to when you go get your listing and how you price the listing. And again, I had Susan Clavon Gronk with me. I mean, not too many people would, you know, dispute that she knows what she's doing. And she looks at what's on the market at that time, and that helps her price it. And at that time of that listing, there was nothing in that price range.
Yep.
So, we may have done a little market testing, but in the end, we ended up with a price that my sellers were comfortable with, and Stan's buyers obviously were comfortable paying. So, really, that kind of worked out until we got this low appraisal. So, you know, I mean, even though you try to do your due diligence at listing, you still really don't know what could happen.
You don't,
But
and
I
it's
think-
tough to see everything.
I think that when Susan was helping you with that, talking to the sellers after your situation, the situation, the sellers were angry with you because you weren't real happy because they felt like the listing agents didn't price it correctly and that they felt like the listing agent had misinformed them. So that's something else you had to deal with, and this is the kind of thing that's going to come up. But so Susan and Teresa just showed them the comps and way they came up with the information, and it was all there.
I
So
make them sign those comps.
make them what?
Sign them. When we go over them,
Good idea. Make it ugly.
they know if it will or it might not.
Well, the problem is, in that case, the comps were there when they listed it, but the appraiser didn't use those comps.
I know, but,
Yeah,
you know,
Use different, well,
you did do your job, that's the thing, they need to know.
they did their job,
Your
right.
job, yeah.
oh, and they know that. And they're buying another house from me that is also an agent-owned, So then when you got a freezer listing.
No,
Oh, yeah, they requested that appraiser.
Yeah.
Sure. Great. But, you know, on our contracts, somewhere on there, it says that you can, you know, what kind of financing will the seller accept? You know, conventional, VA, whatever. And, you know, my people said, well, if we ever sell another house, we will never, ever accept a VA loan again. I mean, they were just adamant about it. And I knew from personal experience, when somebody bought one of the homes that I've sold in the past, it was a VA, they're notorious. And my husband and I were there while he came in to do the inspection. And my husband is like one of those salespeople, and he irritated him to death, I guess, and kept talking. And I think that's the only reason we got the appraisal where we did. Otherwise, he kept pointing out little. Anyway, I've learned a lot.
Well,
I hope everybody else has.
Well, the appraisal, they don't only call it an appraisal on a VA, it's a VA appraisal and inspection. And they do a little bit more in depth looking at the property. But they are a lot better than they were 10 or 20 years ago. I mean, they used to, if you had a torn screen, but you were putting screen, you were fixing it. And so, I mean, if you had one, you were fixing it.
You laughed, we were doing it.
You know, it was almost to the point where felt like you didn't need a home inspection if you knew the VA was fired, because they were going to come up with stuff anyway. But it's typically, what's a VA? They're there to protect the veteran. And, you know, I mean, they call it the best loan in America for a reason. It's got a low rate, 100% financing, no MI. They do charge a funding fee up front, but I mean, it's a great loan. You can get one.
Yeah, I will, actually, we do quite a bit of VA, and I would say honestly, within the last year, I think maybe we've had 2 total deals where value was an issue, because our appraisal platform, VA included. The thing I will tell you is, the way the market's changing, and it used to be appraisers would overinflate homes. Just like they can't overinflate them now, they can't undervalue them dramatically in the market. It's such a controlled process. But if I sent 3 folks out to appraise the home, there would be some variance in there because there's a little bit of subjectivity. The thing that you need to understand about it is, for folks that and I won't bore you with too much, but VA is its own entity. They want to get the appraisal done, and they want to turn it in, and they want to be done, and they want to go get their next fee. Conventional FHA, USDA, all those that go through a giant platform, your client pays $425 roughly for a government appraisal. If they're going through one of those large bank platforms, the appraiser gets about $275 of that. The management company holds the rest. So if you're that appraiser, what are you going to do? You're going to turn in the most conservative appraisal you can so that it's not questioned too much, so that you can move on and get your next $275. And so that's kind of what has happened in the industry, and why values will ultimately be reasonably conservative from these appraisers. We have our own platform on $425, the appraiser gets $425. It doesn't change our values dramatically because it is what it is, but we get 5-day turn times and we can get things fast on them. But that may be a case where you get $115,000 higher in a unique situation because they're going out there and they're appraising it based on what they see. The other person finds it.
But a VA loan, I would have told you, let's get another appraisal just.
Yeah, the other person can find a conservative value in there on a unique property so that they don't have to go back out, re-inspect, or add on, or justify things.
Sure.
So it's kind of a weird dynamic that we're in now with appraisals.
It is, and because of that third party, they can't always find a local appraiser that has to do it. Okay?
Yeah, that's correct.
That's a nightmare.
So the third party handles it. They might get an appraiser from Edisto or Columbia or wherever that doesn't know the market.
This particular person, I think, is from Columbia. And he told me, well, he said he did anywhere from 8 to 10 or upwards of that VA appraisals per week. And I could tell he's been doing it a long time.
Yeah. I got a question on that. That's going to be my question earlier. It's my understanding that the appraisal guidelines are supposed to be familiar with the market by which you're appraising. So you can't have somebody that's not familiar with, say, the Tri-County area, and they give you a bad appraisal and not be able to challenge that.
It's a,
That's a little bit subjective.
well, it is very subjective, and having come from an environment prior to here where we dealt with third party, we would question, we'd get folks coming down from Columbia, and if they had a satellite office in the market, the company was familiar with it. So that's pretty abstract as to whether they're familiar with the market, and they're an hour and a half away, and in most folks' minds, it's not that big of a deal. We know different, being in the market, but that's some of the risks that you run, and get some of those folks that are outside, and that's why we don't want to do a third party and do our own.
There are going to be some times when, we always try to use Prosperity Mortgage, but there are going to be some times when you can't. In this case with Stan, the buyer had a relationship with a Bank of America person, and that you have no control over that.
Yeah, so this particular person, they're great, sweet people, but they fired the first agent, and Liz doesn't even know this, but David Dix used to work for our company, and I know David pretty well. David, they walked into the sales office and told David what was going on. He said, I know a great Mount Pleasant agent. So my phone rings one Sunday morning. This is Bridget. Well, hey, Bridget. So, we have a conversation. I want to fire my agent. Well, is it me? No, thank God. I can't remember everybody. But anyway, I said, well, look, I can't tell you really how to do it. I said, y'all would just call and talk to them. I said, if you tell them you're not happy, just see what happens. So it kind of, spun around a little bit, and they hired me. Showed them some houses, and here we are. But they had long since, they had 2 deals that didn't close, and so, you hate to yank it away from a loan officer to get it in-house. I would, if I got the opportunity, but, just didn't.
Sometimes you don't have that control. I mean, that's what I want. We try our very best, but you can't always do it.
And Liz said one thing earlier. I'll take this opportunity to. She said, "What if I called Liz and I said, Liz, the house didn't appraise?" And she immediately said, "Well, the seller's not going to sell." And my question would be back to her, well, how do you know that? Because almost every agent that I deal with gives me the opinion that the seller's not going to sell and their buyer's not going to do this, and they hadn't asked them, they hadn't talked to them. So the most important thing is when you get the deal, don't try to speak for your client. Just call them, give them the fact, and see what they want to do, and you might be surprised.
Amen.
Right? You might be surprised.
Just
don't
try to be the buyer or the seller.
Don't be them, because you're not. You're there to give them the facts, and then they're going to say, what would you do? I wouldn't sell it. But, if you really want this other house, you might consider doing it. And that's really, I think, what it came down to on this. They wanted the other house they were in the deal with. That's probably what made it work.
It did. I mean, it had just gone so far that it was kind of like, we just really can't, we don't feel like we can turn back now, but, I mean.
Jill, if I might get you to tell us, the group, about the contract that you had with the buyers.
Right.
The appraisal issue.
We would negotiate a contract for over a week and a half, and they go down a little bit, we go up a little bit, and we just didn't feel it would appraise. The buyers didn't think it was going to go to, but the lady would not come down anymore. So we sent an addendum after talking to Liz, and the seller agreed to it, that if it did not appraise within $10,000 of the asking price, she would automatically move the price down $10,000. And she signed it because she's like, I am so sure this is going to appraise. Well, lo and behold, after a whole mess up, for those of you that were here during the 44 inspection period, repairs, it didn't appraise. And it came in $5,000 less. And so we already knew our answer, because they had already signed the addendum saying that if it doesn't appraise within the $10,000, that they would adjust the price. So that worked out for me in this instant wonderfully. I don't think in every case you could go out there and say, hey, if it's not going to appraise, can you promise me you'll adjust your price to a certain amount?
Well, and we were talking about closing costs. I put this in a contract before too, when I was on the listing side, that said, in the event this property does not appraise, the closing cost allowance will be adjusted first.
And where did you put that?
So, just in the contingencies. Don't get too wordy, right, guys?
Right.
Just keep it real simple.
Don't be accused of practicing law.
But, you know, because honestly, what if it's 300, they're paying, you know, 4,000 in closing cost and it appraises for 296. You know, your sellers,
It really is worth $296.
it's worth 296.
You're inflating the price to pay for the closing costs, yeah.
Right, so, I mean, if you think that's the case and you're the listing agent, and honestly, if the seller wants to sell their house, they may have to pay the closing costs. Because people may not have the cash. You know, if they don't have the cash or don't want to come up with the cash and they're gonna walk, you may consider doing it anyway.
It brings up an interesting scenario. We've had this rarely occasioned, but let's take it to the flip side. You negotiate a contract at 296 with no closing costs, and it prices for 300. You can't all of a sudden flip the addendum and say,
You're right.
300 sales price, 4,000 closing costs.
Yeah.
You can't do that on the lender side at the very least.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they're gonna take the lesser of the value.
Any other questions, comments? Well, Stan, thank you very much.